Chapter 1. The Unnaturalness of Scientific Natural Law. Quote, "If the prospect of a dying universe causes us anguish, it does so only because we can forecast it, and we have as yet not the slightest idea why such forecasts are possible for us. A few figures scrawled on a piece of paper can describe the rate the universe expands, reveal what goes on inside a star, or predict where the planet Neptune will be on New Year's Day in the year AD 25,000. Why? Why should nature, whether hostile or benign, be in any way intelligible to us? All the mysteries of science are but palace guards to that mystery." Timothy Ferris. To a thoughtful humanist, this question boggles his mind. How can the mind of man grasp the nature of nature? The Nobel Prize-winning physicist Eugene Wigner once wrote a scholarly paper for a professional mathematics journal, "The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in the Natural Sciences." Why is it, he asked, that mathematics, the product of man's mental artistry, is so useful in predicting the events of nature's independent environment? He had no answer. There is an answer. It is not one which is acceptable to humanists. It is this: man is made in God's image. God created the world, and then he created man to exercise dominion over it. Genesis 1, 26-28. Man's mind comprehends his environment. Not perfectly, but adequately for a creature responsible before God to exercise dominion in God's name. It is only because mankind has this interpretive ability that science can exist. Even more crucial, it is only because God created and actively, providentially sustains this universe that science can exist. Few Christians have been told that without three key doctrines that stem directly from Christian theology, modern science could not have been developed. First, the creation of the universe by a totally transcendent God out of nothing. Second, the sustaining providence of God. Third, linear, straight-line history. The pagan world, including Greece and Rome, did not believe these doctrines, and it did not develop theoretical science. Similarly, both Chinese and Islamic science failed to carry through on their hopeful beginnings in science because they rejected a Christian worldview. Because the West believed in these three doctrines, modern science became possible. Because modern man has abandoned all three of these doctrines, modern science has become increasingly irrational, despite its tremendous advancement. As the experiments become more precise, physicists have lost faith in the coherence of the universe. The 20th century has abandoned the stable, rational worldview of late 19th century physical science. The roots of modern science began in the Middle Ages, an explicitly Christian era, and not in the supposedly atheistic, humanistic Renaissance. One reason for this is that the animist Renaissance was not atheistic. It was pantheistic and magical. Stanley Jakey, theologian, scientist, and historian, has written several books that demonstrate the truth that modern science was the product of a Christian worldview. But two of them are monumental: Science and Creation, 1974, and The Road of Science and the Ways to God, 1978. He is a member of the prestigious Institute for the Advancement of Science at Princeton, New Jersey. Albert Einstein was its most famous member. What Jakey's books show is that modern physical science has become irrational to the degree that it has abandoned the doctrine of a creator God. They chronicle science's abandonment of the idea of natural law and the independent nature that natural law was once believed to govern. Yet Christians continue to appeal to a long-dead version of Newtonian natural law, as if the physicists of the Copenhagen School 60 years ago had not blown away modern science's faith in a universe totally governed by such law. That such arguments impress untrained Christian laymen who maintain their faith in both God and popularized versions of Newton's worldview is not surprising. That such apologetic arguments defending creationism have not led modern scientists to embrace creationism or the Christian faith is even less surprising. Natural law, a dead humanist faith. When Christians today speak of natural law, they have in mind a universe that can be observed by man and that conforms to rigorous mathematical laws, from the far reaches of the galaxy to the boiling water in the tea kettle on the stove. Now, Christians do not really believe in a universe totally governed by such laws. They believe in miracles. These miracles are seen as miracles to the extent that they violate natural law. They also believe in human quote-unquote free will that is outside the mechanical cause and effect, clock-like predictability of Newtonian natural law. Nevertheless, except where man is concerned, Christians believe that the universe is coherent and that God's creation reflects His own orderly nature. Because most people have been influenced by this originally biblical worldview, they also believe in a world that is coherent, yet which also allows freedom and responsibility for human beings. The high school science textbooks of the public schools have not presented the case for 20th century quantum mechanics. The average person cannot grasp quantum mechanics. To this extent, the average person has been gracefully spared a personal confrontation with the impersonal and irrational world of modern physical science. Textbooks, in order to find a market, present a Newtonian worldview which physical scientists abandoned sometime between 1905 and 1925. Here is how Paul Johnson begins his history of the 20th century, probably the finest one-volume history of our century written so far. Quote, "The modern world began on May 29, 1919, when photographs of a solar eclipse taken on the island of Príncipe off West Africa and at Sobral in Brazil confirmed the truth of a new theory of the universe. It had been apparent for half a century that the Newtonian cosmology based upon the straight lines of Euclidean geometry and Galileo's notion of absolute time was in need of serious modification. It had stood for more than 200 years. It was the framework within which the European Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, and the vast expansion of human knowledge, freedom, and prosperity which characterized the 19th century had taken place. But increasingly powerful telescopes were revealing anomalies. In particular, the motions of the planet Mercury deviated by 43 seconds of an arc a century from its predictable behavior under Newtonian laws of physics. Why? In 1905, a 26-year-old German Jew, Albert Einstein, then working in the Swiss Patent Office in Bern, had published a paper on the electrodynamics of moving bodies, which became known as the special theory of relativity. Einstein's observations on the way, in which, in certain circumstances, lengths appeared to contract and clocks to slow down, are analogous to the effects of perspective in painting. In fact, the discovery that space and time are relative rather than absolute terms of measurement is comparable in its effects on our perception of the world to the first use of perspective in art, which occurred in Greece in the 2 decades circa 500 to 480 BC." End quote. This astronomical experiment confirmed in the minds of contemporary scientists Einstein's theory of special relativity. Johnson argues that this confirmation led to a fundamental restructuring of modern man's view of the universe. What he does not mention is the staggering fact that in that same year, 1905, Einstein published 2 other papers that had equally disrupting effects on modern science. The first, on the photoelectric effect, won him the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1921. The second dealt with what scientists call Brownian motion, the peculiar wiggling of extremely tiny particles of matter when suspended in liquids. The first paper confirmed the reality of quantum mechanics, and this has led most theoretical physicists to deny the reality of a subatomic universe. The second paper showed how the reality of atoms could be decided experimentally. The experiments by Jean Perrin that were based on Einstein's suggestion later confirmed the existence of atoms. Einstein's 3 papers almost single-handedly shattered the worldview of Newtonian science, shattered it so completely that even Einstein, who later tried to pick up the pieces, could not put them together again. Newton's view of the universe was the product of Christian presuppositions, As those presuppositions have been borrowed and then abandoned by modern, officially atheistic or religiously skeptical scientists, this view of natural law has become increasingly unacceptable to scientists, as I hope to indicate in this chapter. Thus, any appeal to scientific natural laws as a defense of the Christian faith will prove increasingly useless, and has proved nearly useless for 3 decades. Modern scientists have steadily abandoned any reliance upon the traditional concept of natural law, itself an unstable mixture of Greek philosophical speculation and Christianity, precisely because they have self-consciously abandoned Christianity. This is why any attempt to refute evolutionists by an appeal to the second law of thermodynamics will inevitably backfire. The popularity in Christian circles of the writings of Jeremy Rifkin indicates that this appeal has already backfired. In short, it is a waste of effort to attempt a scientifically acceptable refutation of 20th century physical science by means of an argument based on 19th century concepts of physical cause and effect. I realize that at this point most of my readers will not fully understand what I am saying. I have therefore decided to prove my case in Chapter 1. Unfortunately, much of the material I use to prove my case is somewhat technical. So to help everyone get through it, I recommend that each reader put these words in the back of his mind. These scientists must be crazy. You do not need to remember every argument. All you need to do is remember my conclusion. Modern science has lost its mind. Science has lost its collective mind because scientists have abandoned faith in the God of the Bible. But this raises a key question. Should Christians appeal to modern science, let alone 19th century science, in order to defend their position? Should they build their case for creationism in terms of scientific concepts that have been abandoned by modern science, and which also lead them into the clutches of anti-Christian social theorists? Before I answer these questions, I need to introduce you to a world of arrogant intellectuals who are in the process of going crazy. An autonomous, self-law universe? Do the laws of nature exist independently of man, man's observations, man's tools of observation, man's mathematics, and man's mind? The Bible says yes. The animals reproduced according to their kind before man arrived on the scene. Genesis 1:24-25. These laws do not exist independent of a person, meaning God himself, but they exist independent of man. Today, however, the idea of a law-governed universe independent from man has begun to bother many scientists. As they have become more self-consistent concerning epistemology, what can man know and how can he know it, they have placed all of nature's orderliness in the mind of man. This sounds crazy to most people. Obviously, everyone agrees that the universe existed before man came on the scene. Nature must have operated in terms of fixed laws. Man only discovers these laws. He does not create them. But this common-sense view has come under increasing attack ever since Immanuel Kant wrote his Critique of Pure Reason in 1787. Kant wrote, quote, "Thus the order and regularity in the appearances, which we entitle nature, we ourselves introduce. We could never find them in appearances, had not we ourselves, or the nature of our mind, originally set them there." End quote. We can know nothing of the universe as such, or as he called it, the thing in itself. We cannot say that nature is autonomously an orderly system. Only through the ordering processes inherent in the rational human mind can any orderliness of nature be described, Kant maintained. Modern science has become more and more consistent with Kant in the 20th century. He is the philosopher of the modern world. Does this mean that modern humanist thought teaches that it is actually man who creates the orderliness of nature? Increasingly, this is exactly what is being said. Ferris writes of Sir Arthur Eddington, the brilliant British astronomer of the early 20th century, quote, "Eddington believed the laws of nature reside within our minds, are created not by the cosmos, but by our perceptions of it, so that a visitor from another planet could deduce all our science simply by analyzing how our brains are wired. In Eddington's view, we know physical laws a priori, as Kant maintained. Although where Kant conceived part of our a priori knowledge as inborn, Eddington felt it was derived from experience in observation and reasoning." End quote. This is radical subjectivism, an obvious development of consistent humanism. Prominent modern scientists have resisted the idea that the universe is not law-governed apart from man. Albert Einstein was one of those who resisted it. Physicist Nick Herbert uses biblical imagery to describe Einstein's resistance. Quote, "Einstein, despite his numerous contributions to its success, never accepted quantum theory into his heart and stubbornly held to the old-fashioned belief that a realistic vision of the world was compatible with the quantum facts." End quote. As Einstein wrote, quote, "Belief in an external world independent of the perceiving subject is the basis of all natural science." End quote. That he felt it necessary in the 1930s to make such an intuitively obvious statement indicates the extent of the epistemological crisis that had already begun to engulf modern physical science. Step by step, scientists have adopted subjective epistemologies that do not allow them to support such a faith in an independently lawful universe. 20th century quantum mechanics. You are about to enter the realm of verbal, intellectual chaos. A chaos that modern physical scientists claim is so perfect that every experiment ever conducted in terms of it has confirmed it. To make our way through this chaos, we laymen must rely on popular works that explain the universe, perhaps only a mental universe, studied by modern physicists. A good place to begin is with Chapter 2 of Nick Herbert's book, Quantum Reality. That chapter is titled, Physicists Losing Their Grip. Multiple Theories. Herbert begins his chapter with a quotation from Bryce DeWitt and Neil Graham. Quote, "No development of modern science has had a more profound impact on human thinking than the advent of quantum theory. Wrenched out of centuries-old thought patterns, physicists of a generation ago found themselves compelled to embrace a new metaphysics. The distress which this reorientation produced continues to the present day. Basically, physicists have suffered a severe loss, their hold on reality." End quote. Herbert summarizes 8 theories of how the world of subatomic particles, or waves, or nothing in particular, functions. Laymen should not expect many of these explanations to make sense. In fact, Herbert warns us, quote, "Physicists' reality crisis is twofold. 1. There are too many of these quantum realities. 2. All of them are preposterous." End quote. These theories, all of which supposedly produce reliable predictions of observed representative behavior, are as follows. 1. There is no deep underlying reality. 2. Reality is created by observation. 3. Reality is an undivided wholeness. 4. There are many parallel universes. 5. The world obeys a non-human reasoning. 6. The world is made of ordinary objects. 7. Consciousness creates reality. 8. The world is twofold, potentials and actualities. Each of these theories is defended by brilliant scientists. My favorite, because of its sheer arrogance, is number 4, plural worlds. This can be regarded as the ultimate in magical reasoning, a scientific legacy of the Renaissance's theory of multiple worlds, or the quote-unquote principle of plenitude, as Arthur Lovejoy called it. Herbert summarizes, quote, "Of all claims of the new physics, none is more outrageous than the contention that myriads of universes are created upon the occasion of each measurement act. For any situation in which several different outcomes are possible, flipping a coin for instance, some physicists believe that all outcomes actually occur. In order to accommodate different outcomes without contradiction, entire new universes spring into being, identical in every detail except for the single outcome that gave them birth. In the case of a flipped coin, one universe contains a coin that came up heads, and one containing a coin showing tails." End quote. Our apologetic approach must recognize the reality of what has happened since 1905. Quote, "Just as Newton shattered the medieval crystal spheres, modern quantum theory has irreparably smashed Newton's clockwork. We are now certain that the world is not a deterministic mechanism, but what the world is, we cannot say." End quote. Will Heathkit eventually offer one of these? On the science page of the New York Times, April 14, 1987, are two stories. These two stories summarize the Darwinian revolution better than anything I have ever seen or expect to see. The first discusses, quote, "the black skull," end quote. With its discovery in 1986, quote, "the small, contentious fraternity of paleoanthropology was stunned into a rare state of unanimity. Everyone agreed that the skull was the most significant early human-like fossil to be found in more than a decade. Everyone agreed it would necessitate a major rethinking of the human family tree." End quote. Today, however, everyone is arguing again about how to fit the 2.5 million-year-old skull into the human family tree. Anyone who wants to learn more about this latest piece of Darwinian mythology is welcome to pursue it. The skull points once again to, quote, "man, the product of cosmic purposelessness," end quote. Man has only, quote unquote, recently come out of a tree. Poor man, the grandson of apes. But this myth of man's animal origins has always been only half of the Darwinian theology. It is always accompanied by the second part, quote, "man, the new sovereign of the universe," end quote. On the same page of the Times, we are told of a new theory of physics. The title of the article tells all. "Physicist aims to create a universe," literally. Professor Alan Guth of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and several collaborators argue that it is theoretically possible for mankind to create a whole universe. He does not mean intellectually. He means really and truly cross your heart and hope to live eternally. If you have a sense of the ironic, you will appreciate his introductory essay on the subject published in Physics Letters, quote, "an obstacle to creating a universe in the laboratory," end quote. For all I know, there may be several such obstacles, half a dozen perhaps, beginning with this one. Man is not God. Here is what Dr. Guth expects the Times reader to believe, quote, "The odd thing is that you might even be able to start a new universe using energy equivalent to just a few pounds of matter, provided you could find some way to compress it to a density of about 10 to the 75th power grams per cubic centimeter, and provided you could trigger the thing. Inflation would do the rest." End quote. I think he means inflation as in Big Bang, not inflation as in Federal Reserve System. Where will this new universe fit in the scheme of things? I have a mental picture of a gunslinger coming up to the sheriff with the words, "This galaxy ain't big enough for both of us. One of us will have to leave." I hope Professor Guth clears this experiment with the Environmental Protection Agency, or at the very least with his local zoning board. The reporter comments, quote, "Does this mean that our universe could have been created as the conscious act of human beings in some other universe with which we no longer have any contact?" End quote. Professor Guth's answer is straightforward, quote, "Well, that is the possibility we're exploring. Nothing in our calculations so far has ruled out such a possibility." End quote. Man, the descendant of apes and amoebas, has suddenly become man, the creation of other men, who could be the creation of previous men, etc., ad infinitum. Personally, I think it is a lot cheaper to create quantum universes by flipping a coin. I observe, therefore you are. The most widely shared of the 8 views is the second. Reality is created by observation. Herbert says that this is the second aspect of the vision offered by the Copenhagen physicists, led by Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg. Quote, "Although the numerous physicists of the Copenhagen school do not believe in deep reality, they do assert the existence of phenomenal reality. What we see is undoubtedly real, they say, but these phenomena are not really there in the absence of an observation. The Copenhagen interpretation properly consists of 2 distinct parts. 1. There is no reality in the absence of observation. 2. Observation creates reality. You create your own reality is the theme of Fred Wolf's Taking the Quantum Leap. Herbert goes on to explain what all this means. Note that he uses she as the personal pronoun when he refers to physicists, a sign of the cultural times, since not a single female physicist is referred to in his book. Quote, "What's at stake in the quantum reality question is not the actual existence of electrons, but the manner in which electrons possess their major attributes. Classical physicists imagined that every particle possessed at each moment a definite position and momentum. Each field, likewise, possessed a particular field strength at every location. If we agree to call any entity, particle, field, apple, or galaxy, which possesses its attributes innately, an ordinary object, then the fundamental message of classical physics was this: the entire physical world consists of nothing but ordinary objects. Quantum theory suggests, on the other hand, that the world is not made of ordinary objects. An electron and every other quantum entity does not possess all its attributes innately. An electron does possess certain innate attributes, mass, change, and spin, for instance, which serve to distinguish it from other kinds of quantum entities. The value of these attributes is the same for every electron under all measurement conditions. With respect to these particular attributes, even the electron behaves like an ordinary object. However, all other attributes, most notably position and momentum, which it was thought classical particles possessed innately, can no longer be attached to the electron without qualification. These attributes, called dynamic, to distinguish from the static attributes, mass, change, and spin, do not belong to the electron itself, but seem to be created in part by the electron's measurement context. The fact of the matter is that nobody really knows these days how an electron or any other quantum entity actually possesses its dynamic attributes. According to the Copenhagen interpretation, the electron's dynamic attributes are contextual. What attributes it seems to have depends on how you measure it. An electron's so-called attributes belong jointly to the electron and the measuring device. When a Copenhagenist says, "There is no deep reality," she means that there is no hidden value of position that the electron quote-unquote really has when it is not being measured. Since position is an attribute that belongs jointly to the electron and its measuring device, when you take away the measuring device, you take away the electron's position too. End quote. He concludes with these opaque words, quote, "When you take away the measuring device, the electron undoubtedly still exists, but it possesses no dynamic attributes at all. In particular, it has no definite place or motion. We cannot picture such a state of being, but nature seems to have no trouble producing such entities. Indeed, such entities are all this world is made of." End quote. You are reading this correctly. But to make sure we understand, he says it again, quote, "Electrons cannot really be said to have dynamic attributes of their own. What attributes they seem to have depends upon how we choose to analyze them. A clock comes apart in only one way. It's made of definite parts. A wave, on the other hand, doesn't have parts. You can divide it up any way you please. However, none of these divisions is there to begin with. The kinds of parts a wave seems to have depends on how we cut it up. The world's wave nature makes us, in a certain sense, co-creators of its attributes." End quote. Has Bell gone bats? Herbert is a follower of Irish physicist John Stuart Bell. Bell, in 1964, began working on a mathematical proof that has supposedly solved some of the major problems of quantum theory. Herbert argues that unless we adopt Bell's theory, quantum theory's world of subatomic quote-unquote stuff will remain incoherent and without dynamic attributes except when observed. To introduce Bell's breakthrough, Herbert begins with David Bohm. Quote, "Bohm in 1952 offered a theory that brought objective reality back to the subatomic universe by arguing that the attributes of the quanta are contextual. They influence each other, and thus, in a sense, hold each other together. There was one flaw in his reasoning. To hold each other together in a context, subatomic particles and waves had to connect to each other at speeds faster than the speed of light, Einstein's one universal constant. Without supposing such transluminary connections, there is no way to restore coherence to the quantum world. Without faster-than-light connections, an ordinary object model of reality simply cannot explain the facts." End quote. Consider what he is saying. The speed of light and gravitation have been the modern world's only constants. It is the speed of light that supposedly proves that the universe is over 10 billion years old. It is the speed of light that has shoved creation back into the mists of forgotten time and shoved God out of the universe entirely. Yet now that God is conveniently distant, science is now ready to scrap the speed of light as a constant. God is now psychologically removed from modern science, so the precise scientific instrument that was used to shove him out of his domain can now be restructured to fit man's latest speculative theories of matter. God no longer provides coherence to the quantum world. Scientists desperately wanted to find coherence in the universe apart from God. His Bible was not to be made into the standard of coherence. The speed of light was their agreed-upon choice as the source of cosmic measurement. But this once inflexible speed of light can no longer provide it, at least in the world of the quanta, or so David Bohm's theory indicates. Herbert says that Bell's theorem provides the needed coherence, but only if the concept of space-time relations is scrapped, just as it is scrapped in the biblical account of creation. The mutual influencing process of the world of the quanta must involve the entire universe, Bell says. There must be instantaneous communication across the entire universe. He calls these influences, quote, non-local influences, end quote. 3 centuries ago, they were called the voice of God. Quote, non-local influences do not diminish with distance. They are as potent at 1,000,000 miles as at a millimeter. Non-local influences act simultaneously. The speed of their transmission is not limited by the velocity of light. A non-local interaction links up one location with another without crossing space, without decay, and without delay. A non-local interaction is, in short, unmediated, unmitigated, and immediate. End quote. In 1972, a test was conducted by physicist John Clauser of the University of California, Berkeley. This test demonstrated that 2 photons traveling at the speed of light in different directions influenced one another at a distance instantaneously. He had set out to disprove Bell, which makes the experiment that much more curious. Another test was conducted by physicist Alain Aspect of the University of Paris in 1982. It also confirmed Bell's thesis of non-local reality. The universe is no longer governed by the universal constant of the speed of light. What happens at one end of the universe may very well influence something at the other end, without waiting 20 billion light-years. What Bell has offered is a mathematical proof of an interconnected, yet still impersonal, universe. There is no personal God holding it together. Herbert's song, Bell's Theorem Blues, indicates the problem. Dr. Bell say we connected. He call me on the phone. Dr. Bell say we united. He call me on the phone. But if we really together, baby, how come I feel so all alone? Think of what Colossians says about Jesus Christ. By him were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, and he is before all things, and by him all things consist. Colossians 1:16a and 17. God's administration of cause and effect is not constrained by the speed of light. But if the speed of light is no longer a limiting constant, what about the 20 billion-year-old universe, a calculation based on the speed of light? Schrödinger's cat. The British Broadcasting Corporation (BBC) asked physicist John Gribben to explain to the viewers what science now teaches about subatomic particle waves. Gribben was the scientist who co-authored a book in 1974 about the biggest non-event of the 1980s, the 1982 quote-unquote grand alignment of the planet Jupiter and several other planets, which supposedly might set off earthquakes around the world. Nothing happened. Nevertheless, Isaac Asimov wrote the foreword to the book, so Gribben was at least within the quote-unquote pop science fraternity in 1974, and was not cast out after 1982. Gribben is a defender of Copenhagen's version of quantum theory. Nothing is real at bottom, and so it is the observation that imparts reality to the subatomic world. He discusses the fact that Einstein found the conclusions of quantum mechanics unacceptable. So did physicist Erwin Schrödinger. The two men wanted desperately to believe in the inherent orderliness of autonomous nature. But such a view is scientifically old-fashioned, Gribben's book demonstrates. Modern quantum mechanics rests on the presupposition that the subatomic world is governed by equations, and there is no underlying physical reality corresponding to the equations. The equations, not physical reality, are primary in modern quantum mechanics. As he forthrightly says, nothing is real. Quote, "For what quantum mechanics says is that nothing is real, and that we cannot say anything about what things are doing when we are not looking at them." End quote. Schrödinger resisted this implication of modern physics, which after all is supposed to deal with what the Greeks called physis, the independent, eternal laws of nature. The subatomic world, modern physics tells us, is a world in which light is both wave and particle. It is a world governed by equations, not physical reality. So Schrödinger designed a hypothetical experiment which he believed would refute the worldview of quantum mechanics. "Place a cat in a box," he said. "In the box is a hammer suspended over a glass container of poisonous gas. The hammer is connected to a triggering device that in turn is connected to another device that registers the decay of a radioactive substance. If a particular atom decays, the recording device signals the triggering device that holds the hammer. This second device releases the hammer, which falls on top of the glass container, releasing the gas. The cat dies. Say that there is a 50-50 chance that in any period of time the particular controlling atom will decay. The cat therefore has a 50-50 chance of surviving. Thus, the survival of the cat is based on a statistical probability, the decay or non-decay of an atom. Place the lid on the box. The experimenter can no longer see the cat. Now, Schrödinger asked, is the cat dead or alive? Has the radioactive material produced the decay of the atom that will trigger the hammer, break the glass container, release the gas, and kill the cat? According to quantum mechanics, Schrödinger fully understood an atomic particle is simply a statistical wave function. It is in an undefinable state in between decay and non-decay. If this is true about atomic particles, Schrödinger was saying, then the cat is also only a statistical wave function. It is neither dead nor alive. It remains simply a statistical wave function until such time as someone opens the box and sees whether it is dead or alive. But doesn't this prove that the world of quantum theory is preposterous? Schrödinger thought that it did. Obviously, the experiment really deals with radioactive wave particles, not cats. But Schrödinger thought that by describing the quantum theory in terms of a common object such as a cat, he would show the preposterous nature of quantum mechanics theory regarding the non-substance of unobserved atoms. Einstein agreed with him, but instead of persuading their professional colleagues of the reality of subatomic physical particles, this hypothetical experiment convinced a generation of quantum theorists of the truth of the preposterous. They came to believe that the cat really would occupy a statistical no-man's land between existence and non-existence. The only way to give actual status to the cat, either dead or alive, is to open the box and look. Gribben writes, quote, "But now we encounter the strangeness of the quantum world. According to the theory, neither of the two possibilities open to the radioactive material, and therefore to the cat, has any reality unless it is observed. The atomic decay has neither happened nor not happened. The cat has neither been killed nor not killed until we look into the box to see what has happened. Theorists who accept the pure version of quantum mechanics say that the cat exists in some indeterminate state, neither dead nor alive, until an observer looks into the box to see how things are getting on. Nothing is real unless it is observed." End quote. All this stems from, quote, "the fundamental axiom of quantum theory, that no elementary phenomenon is a phenomenon until it is a recorded phenomenon, and the process of recording can play strange tricks with our everyday concept of reality." End quote. What about electrons? What about radioactive decay? Does a physical process of cause and effect govern them? Is there a physical explanation for the decay of a particular atom at a particular time? No, says quantum mechanics. Gribbin writes that, quote, no underlying reason for radioactive decay or atomic energy transitions to occur when they do has ever been found. It really does seem that these changes occur entirely by chance on a statistical basis, and that already begins to raise fundamental philosophical questions. In the classical world, everything has its cause. But in the world of the quantum, such direct causality begins to disappear as soon as we look at radioactive decay and atomic transitions. An electron doesn't move down from one energy level to another at a particular time for any particular reason. No outside agency pushes the electron, and no internal clockwork times the jump. It just happens for no particular reason now rather than later. End quote. Things happen for no particular reason. This sounds crazy to the average person. It sounded crazy to Schrödinger and Einstein too. In later years, Schrödinger said of his hypothetical experiment, quote, I don't like it, and I'm sorry I ever had anything to do with it. End quote. Nevertheless, this nonsense is today the foundation of modern physical science, from chemistry to genetic engineering. The idea of physical cause and effect has disappeared in the discipline of subatomic physics. The idea of statistical randomness has triumphed to such an extent that scientists really believe that all there really is in the unobserved world is statistical randomness, until they or one of their instruments measures an effect. In short, no observer, no reality. Lest Gribbin's speculations regarding the lack of causality be dismissed as the ramblings of an unrepresentative physicist, consider the words of John von Neumann, one of the most respected mathematicians of this century. He wrote what Herbert has called the Quantum Bible. Neumann said that, quote, there is at present no occasion and no reason to speak of causality in nature, because no experiment indicates its presence, since macroscopic experiments are unsuitable in principle, and the only known theory which is compatible with our experiences relative to elementary processes, quantum mechanics, contradicts it. End quote. Historian of science Stanley Jakey traces this line of reasoning back to a 1927 scholarly paper by physicist Werner Heisenberg. Jakey, a Benedictine scholar and a philosophical realist, rejects such speculation as quote-unquote careless, but he admits that Neumann's book, quote, is still regarded as perhaps the deepest and most rigorous probing into the mathematical foundations of quantum mechanics, end quote. The physicists have done with physical cause and effect what they have also done with God. First, they have denied that anyone can know the process of physical causation in subatomic physics, and therefore the concept of physical causation is irrelevant to subatomic physics. Second, they jump, and not randomly, to the conclusion that a cause and effect relationship does not exist in the realm of subatomic physics. Substitute God for cause and effect, and you can see the transition from official agnosticism to atheism. If this view of quantum mechanics is assumed by a significant minority of modern physicists, then what does the quantum physicist do with subatomic reality when that reality has no God to observe it? Does it disappear? Gribbin struggles with the unsatisfying intellectual alternatives left to man. He begins with atheism as the only scientifically acceptable presupposition. No outside observer exists. Quote, by definition, the universe is self-contained. It includes everything. So there is no outside observer who notices the existence of the universe, and thereby collapses its complex web of interacting alternative realities into one wave function, end quote. In other words, there is no God who observes what is going on inside the closed box of the universe, precisely because it is a closed box. Problem: who gives reality to the universe by reducing the statistically possible wave functions to a single wave function? Who makes the world real? Gribbin is willing to consider even Bishop Berkeley's 18th century philosophy, solipsism, the idea that I know that I exist, but that it is impossible to prove that anyone else exists. Quote, I would prefer even the solipsist argument. that there is only one observer in the universe, myself, and that my observations are the all-important factor that crystallizes reality out of the web of quantum possibilities. But extreme solipsism is a deeply unsatisfactory philosophy for someone whose own contribution to the world is writing books to be read by other people." End quote. Nevertheless, better this, quote, "deeply unsatisfactory philosophy," end quote, than faith in the providential God of the Bible, Gibbon is saying. We see the truth of the psalmist. "The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God." Psalm 14, verse 1a. Modern science has adopted foolishness rather than adopt the doctrine of the creation of the world by God. Today's scientists are unwilling to accept as the basis of the world of subatomic physics, or even of Schrödinger's cat, the words of Moses. "The secret things belong unto the Lord our God, but those things which are revealed belong unto us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of this law." Deuteronomy 29:29. If scientific man cannot know the secret things of the universe, then scientists are prepared to argue that chaos is Lord. If man's statements about the unseen universe are limited to making statistical correlations, then the unseen universe itself is nothing more than statistical correlations. Humanist man attempts to create the universe in his own image. The Christian replies that God knows everything, God observes everything, and God holds the universe together. And He is before all things, and by Him all things consist. Colossians 1:17. The atheist scientist would rather live in a world whose substance is nothing more than statistical models than to admit that this world is God's. The disintegration of the West's worldview. Why this digression on quantum mechanics? Because 20th century science must be recognized for what it is, a system self-consciously upheld by the irrational. Modern physics is beginning to resemble Eastern mysticism, as we see in books such as Fritjof Capra's The Tao of Physics, 1975, and Gary Zukav's The Dancing Wu-Li Masters, 1980, both of which appear in Gibbon's recommended bibliography, despite his disclaimer that in his book, we would find no Eastern mysticism. As atheistic scientists become more consistent in their atheism, they find that the subatomic world is disintegrating, if not before their very eyes, then at least whenever they close them or turn off their measuring devices. But this disintegration of the unobserved realm of subatomic physics has not taken place, because the actual realm of subatomic physics is really a statistical wave function whenever no one is observing it. No, it is because the Christian worldview of the West has been abandoned. The West's vision of reality is disintegrating, not the realm of matter. To sustain that original scientific vision of an integrated, coherent universe, men need a biblical doctrine of God. From the days of Isaac Newton, there have been major unanswered and seemingly unanswerable questions associated with modern physics. Gravity is a big question. How do stars and planets influence each other, as Newton claimed, at a distance? If there is no substance linking them, then how does one produce an effect on the other, or both on each other? This question baffled scientists right up until the end of the 19th century, when they finally agreed to stop asking. They had first proclaimed that a substance called the ether fills interstellar space, and then they spent almost 2 centuries trying to find any evidence of its existence. They failed, and after Einstein and other modern physical theorists began writing in the first decade of this century, scientists finally abandoned belief in the ether. They now face a major question: ether or what? They could answer as Newton did, that it is God who holds the mass of the universe together, not the ether. They could say that an invisible yet undiscovered physical force holds it together, but we will not call it the ether. They could say that nothing holds it together, but somehow it displays incredibly predictable regularities. They are so hostile to the idea that a personal force, God, holds it together, that they would prefer to believe that nothing does. Or they could say that it is held together by statistical formulas. More and more, they are drifting toward the last solution. Until they agree, however, they just repeat endlessly, gravity holds it together, for want of a better magical incantation. What I am arguing is simple enough. The concept of natural physical law is acceptable intellectually only to those who are Christians, or at least those whose worldview has been heavily influenced by the conclusions of theism. To the extent that men abandon biblical Christianity, they abandon the foundation of rational discourse. In this century, scientists have become more consistent with their anti-God presuppositions. They have therefore begun to destroy the intellectual foundation of science. They would rather abandon natural law than retain faith in a God-sustained universe. Step by step, from the realm of unobserved subatomic physics to Schrödinger's cat in the box, irrationalism is invading Western science. 20th century scientists have steadily abandoned faith in natural law, and in some ways what they have adopted resembles magic. Physicist John Wheeler has written, quote, "There may be no such thing as the glittering central mechanism of the universe to be seen behind a glass wall at the end of the trail. Not machinery, but magic may be the better description of the treasure that is waiting." End quote. The quest for natural law. From the day that men began to observe the external realm around them, they have faced the problem of sorting out the quote-unquote meaningful regularities from the quote-unquote irrelevant events of any aspect of reality. We know, for example, that biological species reproduce in certain ways. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth the living creatures after his kind." Genesis 1:24a. Discovering what a kind is, or discovering the essential nature of each kind, is not as easy as it sounds. Discovering the biological mechanism, and mechanism is probably a misleading word, of transmitting and maintaining a kind is exceedingly difficult. Why is a sheep not a goat? Why is a donkey not a horse? Why is a mule neither a donkey nor a horse, but the offspring of a donkey and a horse? And why can't a mule reproduce? These are legitimate scientific questions. Scientists require models to help them sort out the relevant from the irrelevant. They need to know the essence of some feature of the world they are investigating, meaning fixed relationships. What is fixed about any relationship, and what is flexible? What is necessary, and what is irrelevant? Necessary for what purpose? Irrelevant for what purpose? Are the observed regularities that we have regarded as crucial truly fixed? Or are they simply statistical averages? Are they fixed unless? Do men always die unless God intervenes? Does clothing always wear out unless God intervenes? How can we define God intervenes without simultaneously tampering with the doctrine of the providence, the sustaining hand of God? Does God control the world in two essentially different ways, by predictable law, but also by occasional violations of this supposedly fixed natural order? In short, what is a law of nature? How can we measure it or put it to productive use? What is a random deviation from a law of nature? What, for that matter, is randomness? What is a miracle? Can we legitimately speak of absolutely fixed natural laws without denying miracles? Can we speak of miracles without in some way compromising the definition of natural law? More important, can we legitimately speak of God's providence without calling into question the naturalness, independence, or self-contained lawfulness of natural law? Can we speak of natural law without adopting humanist presuppositions concerning the autonomy of nature, the simplicity of nature, and the impersonalism of nature? In the past, discussions of the laws of nature have led to humanist conclusions, which is one reason why Darwinism triumphed historically. These kinds of questions were important in the transition from quote-unquote Christian Newtonian science to modern evolutionism during the 19th century. Christians had already given up too much ground to the humanist scientists by the time Origin of Species was published in 1859. Christian scholars still have yet to deal systematically with these issues, which is one reason why the humanists have been so successful in eliminating Christians from scientific debate. For the most part, they still agree with the humanists with respect to the observed regularities of, quote, nature in general. They debate only about the, quote, once-in-a-while deviations from natural law, miracles, demonic occurrences, God's direct revelation to man, and so forth. The humanist scientists have seen fit to ignore a scientific world and life view based on once-in-a-while deviations from nearly autonomous natural law. Covenantal regularities. The Christians have not framed their explanations of the external world in terms of a biblical doctrine of the covenant. As James Jordan remarks, quote, "Why doesn't God do miracles all the time?" Well, the answer to this is so we can fulfill the cultural mandate of Genesis 1:26-28 and 2, verse 15. If God were always changing his ways of doing things, we could not count on the world's going along the same way from day to day. God, however, has covenanted to keep the world on a predictable course. Genesis 8:20-22. What we have here is not some natural law which we may take for granted, but God's covenantal faithfulness, which must lead us to worship. Science is possible only on the basis of faith in God's Word, His promise to keep things going in a predictable way. We can count on God, depend on Him. In short, what we call natural laws are simply summary statements of what God usually does. There are no natural laws which God has infused into the universe to run the universe automatically. God is wholly personal, and He personally runs all things." End quote. In the eyes of a conventional non-Christian scientist, any violation of the perceived autonomous order or disorder of the universe must be rejected. Above all, nature must be explained as autonomous from God, whether nature is inherently orderly or disorderly. The humanist says categorically that such unexplained events cannot possibly be the direct or indirect interventions of the God of the Bible. Laws of nature are only the beginning of the intellectual theological problem. What about laws of human behavior? What about laws of social development? Are these laws really laws? Are they fixed? Can we make accurate predictions if we know them? Do they even exist? This raises another very important and difficult intellectual problem: the relationship between physical regularities and social regularities. Can we legitimately apply physical laws, regularities, to social relationships? I argue in this book against such a connection, but others have long argued the opposite. Then there is an additional question. How will defenders of various world and life viewpoints interpret the regularities that they discover? It is never simply a question of raw data, brute facts, and inescapable law. It is always a question of how these perceived facts are interpreted. People are not neutral, not even scientists. So we must also bear in mind that the various discoveries of science will be used by scholars to prove different things. This is why we need to understand the major competing worldviews even before we begin to discuss the primary topic of the book, the second law of thermodynamics, and its legitimate uses, if any, in social theory. Conclusion. The search for regularities is legitimate. It is an inescapable aspect of all rational and scientific investigation. Nevertheless, we must beware of any proposed system of regularities that relies on any supposed autonomous law of nature. Nature is orderly, just as God is orderly, but nature is not autonomous, and nature's laws are not autonomous. Nature is not simple, which is why we have to devise mental shorthand models of reality to assist us in our search for order and to help us to predict future events. We are simple-minded. Nature is not simple. The more that physicists study nature, the more complex and baffling it becomes for them. The nice, stable mathematical universe described by Newton is accurate up to a point, but not a subatomic point. Our knowledge of Newtonian regularities enables us to achieve tremendous progress, but the more deeply that scientists look into the workings of nature, the more complex nature seems to be, and the more overwhelmed the scientists become. Their own equations become the only true reality for them. In this sense, nature is like the Bible. It is simple enough for retarded people to understand and be converted. It is also difficult enough to baffle teams of scholars. Both nature and the Bible reflect God. He is both simple, 1, and complex, 3. We should beware of any exclusive reliance on such shorthand theories as Occam's famous 14th century razor, that the simplest explanation is always best. The simplest explanation, from Occam to Darwin to modern physics, always excludes God as an unnecessary and overly complex hypothesis. It may not be harmful to use a modified version of Occam's explanatory razor as Henry Morris does, but taking it too seriously is dangerous. If we adopt it as a universal rule, the humanists will use it to erase God from the universe. Regularities are covenantal. They are created by God. God uses them for His purposes, and we can use them for ours. But the farther away we get from God ethically, the less effective our knowledge of universal laws will be. Furthermore, the world around us will begin to display the annoying aspects of wear and tear that Jeremy Rifkin and Henry Morris call entropy. God's curses, day by day, will manifest themselves more plainly. These manifestations of God's judgment will not be random, however. In this sense, they will be far more threatening than mere impersonal entropy. This covenantal cause and effect relationship between ethical rebellion and external curses from God also points to its opposite. The closer we get to God ethically, the less our social world and even the natural world will be subject to the cursed aspects of entropy. Our wives and animals will not suffer miscarriages. Exodus 23:26. Our genetic pool will improve. This cannot be explained in terms of the atheistic version of the Newtonian science of the 19th century. Entropy, therefore, is an interpretive category. Men interpret science in terms of their presuppositions concerning the nature of God, man, time, and law. In summary, 1. The humanist has no answer for the question, how does the mind of man understand the universe? 2. The humanist has no answer for the question, why does mathematics, a product of the mind, successfully describe the operations of the external universe? 3. The biblical answer is simple. God created the world, and He created man in His image. 4. Christians have 3 doctrines that make science possible: creation, providence, and linear time. 5. When Christians refer to natural law, they have in mind a God-created order. 6. As humanists have abandoned the biblical outlook, they have lost faith in natural law. 7. Modern humanistic philosophy replaces God with autonomous man. 8. Modern philosophy therefore makes the operations of the world dependent on the mind of man. 9. Modern science has begun to reflect modern philosophy. 10. Some scientists have resisted this conclusion, for example, Einstein, Schrödinger. 11. Modern quantum mechanics abandons the views of the older, quote-unquote, independent world physicists. 12. Quantum mechanics teaches that without a human observer, the universe is merely statistical wave functions. 13. The concept of physical cause and effect has been increasingly abandoned by modern physics in the realm of subatomic physics. 14. Modern physics is based on the idea that chaos is Lord, governed only by mathematical formulae. 15. Irrationalism now rules the world of science. 16. Men seek regularities in the world around them in order to make sense of the world and to control it. 17. They seek laws of nature. 18. Prior to the 20th century, the idea of the universal laws of nature was based on the belief that A. There is no God, and B. The universe is self-sustained, autonomous. 19. How can we explain God's miracles in a world controlled completely by impersonal natural law? 20. The biblical answer is the covenant. 21. All facts are God-created facts and God-interpreted facts. 22. There is no neutrality. 23. Facts don't speak for themselves. 24. The search for regularities is legitimate. 25. If these regularities are not seen as covenantal, they are eventually denied in favor of irrationalism, tyranny, or both.